Okay, sorry folks, I apologize for being late. We're gonna call the meeting of Middleburg Planning Commission Tuesday, May 21st, 2019 to order. Will you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For roll call, Jake, you should take notice we're missing a couple commissioners, please.
Got it.
First thing on the agenda is approval of some past minutes, April the 16th. I think we'll go over these and then we'll just ask for a vote on all of them. So does anybody have questions, deletions, additions, or anything for?
Can you maybe pull the mic? I'm getting indications from the audience that they can't hear.
Can't hear
so
me?
Maybe pull that closer to you.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you.
April 16th, Planning Commission hearing. Anybody got any corrections on that, additions? Okay, let's go to April 22nd. Any changes on April 22nd? Okay, let's go to April 29th. Any changes on that one? Additions?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Okay, so on C2.2, I don't remember the maximum height being 35 feet on buildings. So the reason I'm questioning that is I know we had a discussion about when you're measuring to the middle line of from the top to the bottom, right?
Yeah.
And so 35 feet means that building's going to be 45 or more feet
Yes.
tall. And so we're okay with the 35? I couldn't remember that being what we decided on. Because I wrote down, I think, 20 or 25 because we wanted 35 feet, but we needed that lower number to get that midline.
Okay, let's refer back to staff on that.
Does
You
that
got-
make sense, what I'm saying, or not?
You really don't.
I don't remember the specifics of that now.
I can go back and listen to the
Janelle.
recording.
Janelle knows the answer.
I remember the discussion and the difference between the midpoint and the height it wasn't that great. We calculated it out based on square footage and all. But thought we settled on, it was a difference of maybe 4 feet, not 10 feet. And I don't remember if we actually changed that yet in the.
I don't either, that's why I'm questioning it.
Well, I recall
In
35,
general-
I recall 35 feet, but
Yeah,
Okay.
because generally, the old way of building was 4 and 12 pitches on roofs. Well, now they're much,
yeah.
at a stiffer angle, so you're going to get more height just because of the roofs going higher.
Well, you could have one higher, you could have one a little bit lower, depending on
Oh,
the
of
pitch.
course
You're
you can.
absolutely right.
But the architecture today is really
Yeah.
higher peaks than it was in the past. So
Yeah.
you need that extra height.
So leave it 35 then?
I think so.
Okay. And
That's
then
good. Yeah.
the next question I have is on 3.2. Did we remove the single family from the mixed zone use? We did? Okay. I guess I missed that one. There was a lot of discussion. And then one more thing, on number 3.3.2, access spacing, a note to be added, address circular driveway provisions. So are we adding circular driveways to properties when we only have one driveway per property? I know there was a lot of discussion about that
Yes,
too.
it is.
We were waiting for John Morgan to incorporate the new driveway with
The
concept.
percentage of the
We'll
frontage.
Go with the planning commission at the next one. So that one hadn't been decided yet because
Okay.
that hadn't been incorporated.
Correct.
And I believe the discussion was around, it would be a total width allowed, and that could be potentially
Split.
split between multiple driveways if the conditions were.
But there still has to be like 50 feet between driveways.
Not necessarily, I don't think that was in the,
Okay.
well, depending on what road it's at.
Oh, right, okay. Okay, that was all I had on that one.
Is that it? Okay, if there's no more questions then, I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes of April 16th, April 22nd, April 29th, and May 13th.
I'd like to move that we approve the minutes as written.
I have a motion to approve.
Second.
Did you have a
Did you want to
correction?
discuss May 13th?
Yeah,
That was
we
the last
didn't
one.
discuss
Okay,
the
okay, I'm
other-
sorry. That
You
got
skipped
by
over
me.
that one.
Okay, let's back up then.
I have one thing on that one, and it's on number C1, 14.4, and it's the 80% of the assessed value of the destroyed for non-conforming. I know we discussed that, did we agree on that? I don't remember us agreeing on that. I know we talked about it,
I think we did.
that we agreed, all agreed on it.
Well, we worked with different percentages, and the 80% was what we came up with. As a matter of fact, I suggested it.
I remember you suggested, I just couldn't remember if we all agreed on
I
that.
think we did, didn't we?
I think John thought that that was the general consensus, but again, you'll have a chance to look at it in the next draft as well.
Okay.
I know for purposes of the minutes, I think this is accurate.
Okay, all right, good
Okay.
enough.
Doesn't mean you have to live with it later on.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to,
I still make the motion that we approve the minutes as written.
that's it, okay, I have a motion
Second.
and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries then. Okay, the introduction to open public hearing. Tonight, we're holding and continued public hearing for the Evening Star Manufactured Home Park Conditional Use Permit 1901 and Site Plan 1901. Tonight's meeting is for deliberation only. The public testimony portion of the hearing was closed on April 22nd. No additional testimony will be allowed tonight. The record was left open for an additional 21 days. All written testimony provided during the time was posted on the internet and distributed to each planning commissioner. Staff drafted a memo responding to comments made by the applicant's team. Tonight, we will go over that memo. The meeting will proceed as follows. Staff will make a presentation, followed by a presentation from legal counsel, and then the planning commission will deliberate. Could we have our staff report, Mr. Straight?
Thank you, Chair, fellow commissioners. Matt Straight presenting for staff. I'm basically just introducing Mr. Wally Lean, who's going to be walking us through a memo, which is also considered a supplemental staff report, and that was distributed to the Planning Commission and made available to the public as well. But in that introduction, I wanted to mention that we did leave the record open pursuant to the last request for 3 different periods. We received 13 letters during the first 7-day period, and then there was a chance for everybody to rebut any of those letters that came in. And during that period, we received 3 letters. And then, of course, the applicant gets the last shot at that, and he gets a 7-day period to write a rebuttal to everything that was submitted. And the applicant did indeed submit a letter during that time period as well. And those were all uploaded to the internet for everybody to read and provided to the Planning Commission as well. We, staff and legal counsel, put together a memorandum and distributed that to the Planning Commission, and we're going to have Mr. Wally Lean walk us through that memo right now. So, Wally, floor is yours.
Thank you, Matt and Mr. Chairman. The way to look at this thing is you have your original staff report that is dated April 5th, and the May 15th memo is a supplement to that. So in order to understand and get the full flavor for the findings, the conclusions, and the recommendations that staff has, you have to read the two together. And in some cases that we'll discuss as we go through, the conditions and the findings and the discussion has changed from the original staff report after we've heard all of the comments and done more research and talked about it. So that when we get to the staff recommendation, the conditions are sometimes different, they're sometimes amended, there's new conditions, and sometimes there's conditions that are recommended to be deleted. and we'll walk through those, each one. The memo is based basically on the arguments that were put forward by the applicant in response to the original April 5th staff report. And it's broken into a couple of different sections. The first one being procedural error, and there were several arguments with regard to notice and mailing and not getting this and not getting that. And I'm not going to go into detail, but effectively what we have determined is that there isn't any merit to the arguments with regard to procedural error. The applicant, in fact, had actual notice. He appeared, went through the process, so we don't think that there's any procedural error at all that would trip us up with regard to this application. The second part is trying to tie together the interrelationship between the local code and the specialty code. And that gets to be a little tricky, as everybody can imagine. Because in some places, the specialty code deals very specifically and technically with requirements. And in other places, they're silent. They don't say anything. And in our local code, there are places that we have very specific and technical requirements that match up with the specialty code, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes the local code is silent on issues. But because this involves a site plan and a conditional use, and the Planning Commission has the ability to make conditions of approval, then we have tried to look at primarily health, safety, and welfare kinds of issues in determining whether or not we ought to move forward in a certain direction. And that's taking into account the difficulties with the Needed Housing Act, which is the next section of the arguments that we run into. And the Needed Housing Act is sort of a super law. And we have all of our code provisions, but when the Needed Housing Act was put in by the legislature, it was an overlay. And it basically what it says is in certain places where your code is inconsistent, you can't use your code. Even though our code says thou shalt do X, Y, and Z, if the specialty code is different from that, we have to follow the specialty code. And then the other thing about the Needed Housing Act is every process and every condition has to be evaluated under that standard of clear and objective. Everything has to be clear and objective. And when we looked at the case law used the term value-laden. If you have to make a value-laden kind of a decision, it probably isn't clear and objective because you're exercising a value judgment. And the case law has said we can't do that. And those characteristics that we found in the law motivated a lot of the changes that you'll see as we go through. So that is the effect of the Needed Housing Act. And the last section that I want to spend some time going through are the specific objections to conditions. And the first condition that was objected to is condition 5. At the end of your May 15th memo, you will find, it's page 11, you'll find the amended conditions of approval that staff has come up with, and I want to talk about those, but it might be good to turn to that page 11, and we'll go through these conditions and try to point out where we held with what we had thought before and where we had to change. And the first 4 are pretty standard kind of conditions. We felt those were all met the clear and objective requirement. So you'll find no change in the conditions proposed by staff from the April staff report to the May staff report in conditions 1 through 4. When we get to condition 5, there is an issue that we ran into. And condition 5 involves the width of the street, the allowance for parking. And if you will remember in the first draft, we were asking for a wider street and parking on both sides for fire access and things. And as we went through the specialty code and the table and how that all worked together, we determined that we weren't really allowed to do that. That's just not in the cards with the combination of the Needed Housing Act and the specialty code. And so what we have done, if you remember in the original staff report, I think it's table 10C, has the requirements for street width and parking. And the applicant's position was they get to choose which one of those options. And of course, they chose the option that was 20 feet. And staff looked at it, and we don't find anything in the specialty code or any mandate from the Needed Housing Act that says the applicant gets the opportunity to make that selection. And our feeling is, given the provisions in our code, that the city has the ability to condition that. So what we have done is we've specified the first 100 feet of the street has to be built to city standards, and that's as specified in the specialty code. And that's, I think, on the site plan already. The next thing is that the revision for the street, the remainder of the internal streets, shall be a paved width of 30 feet. And it is important to make a distinction. Normally, we talk about curb to curb, but in this case, they're not curbs. And so we have to, when we're talking about how are we going to deal with the street, we talk about pavement width. So we know that we're going, that pavement has to be 30 feet, and we don't have to worry about the curbs because there are no curbs in this case. We originally talked about parallel parking on one side, so there's no change there. And if that change requires another revision, then that'll have to come back before you. But we think the changes are going to be pretty slight at this point. So that's the reasons behind the changes to the street width. We think that we have the ability to make that selection, and that's option 3 in the table. And we believe that if we have parking on one side and 30 feet of paving, that we provide health, safety, and welfare for fire apparatus and emergency vehicles to get through. So that's the basis of your staff recommendation for the change to number 5. 6 is, I have to look here. 6 is sidewalks. And if you remember, we had a sidewalk width, and we required sidewalks on both sides, and then there had to be a green strip between the edge of the paving, and that would match up with what we require in a regular single-family housing development. But there's some pretty restrictive requirements in the specialty code, and we really thought long and hard and researched that, and there's a very specific provision in the specialty code that says sidewalks can't be more than 4 feet. And it was pretty clear. It's as clear and objective as we could get, and so we figured that we have to comply with that. And the specialty code also specifically says you can only require a sidewalk on one side of the street. So you'll find that the provisions that we had in for sidewalks and green strips no longer apply. And so basically the way the site plan is written complies with the specialty code, and so there's no need for condition 6. Therefore, you'll notice that in the list of conditions we've deleted condition number 6 regarding sidewalks. Condition number 7 relates to street lighting. And if you remember, that condition required shielding, because there's some lighting that is proposed in the site plan now. But staff felt originally that in order to best protect the neighborhood, that they needed to be shielded, so there wouldn't be illumination escaping off-site. And that's a pretty traditional requirement that's done for single-family subdivisions. But it isn't provided for in the specialty code. And we felt that it hit that value-laden judgment, that when we said, well, we're going to require shielding in order to protect the neighbors, that's too value-laden, and we could never make that stick under the Fair Housing Act. So you'll notice that that condition 7 is deleted, and the lighting will be as proposed in the site plan. Number 8 is a procedural process about how they submit plans to the staff for review of engineering and that sort of thing. There's no change to condition number 8. Same thing with regard to condition number 9, the trash collection plan. There was no objection to that. We made no changes to that. We think it's clear and objective. Condition number 10, you'll see is really truncated compared to what it was. All of the landscaping details, the canopy trees, all hit the value-laden judgment criteria, and in our opinion, we could never make that stand. It just doesn't comply with either the specialty code or with the Needed Housing Act. So condition 10 now is just dealing with irrigation. And there was a question with regard to irrigation as well. And the original staff report required a little bit more detail and a little bit more irrigation. But the site plan does have some provision for irrigation, and staff felt that if we required more irrigation than what is shown on the site plan, that would get us into trouble with Needed Housing Act as well, because that would be a value-laden decision. Well, we think you need to have more irrigation. Well, that's the kind of stuff that the Needed Housing Act says we can't do. And so now your condition 10 simply says that the irrigation plan that they have has to comply with code. And the same thing really happens with 11, because there was landscaping issues in condition number 11. And basically, we took the same approach. We eliminated all of the additional landscaping that we proposed in the original staff report, and felt like we really couldn't go any farther than the landscaping that they have currently provided in the site plan. So, and there's trees and there's some shrubs and things in the site plan. And so what condition number 11 has been changed is that they have to give us a detailed landscaping plan, but not in accordance with our code, but in accordance with what they submitted on page 5 of their design. And staff felt like what's there didn't give us enough information to determine whether or not it was going to be adequate. So we're just asking for a detailed landscaping plan that matches up with what they proposed in the site plan. Condition number 12 regarding stormwater. We've really looked at that with regard to health, safety, and welfare, the requirements for FEMA, and all of the different regulations with regard to stormwater runoff. And we went through this pretty carefully and determined that it is, in fact, clear and objective enough. It's not value-laden. It follows the basic language of the rules that are in place. And so we propose no change whatsoever to the stormwater issues that are in Exhibit 12, or Condition 12, excuse me. Exhibit 13, we didn't change either, but I did want to talk about that a little bit. One of the issues that came up was there's an allegation of illegal flow from neighboring properties onto the subject property, and that the applicant didn't have an obligation to treat or detain water that comes from somebody else when it's illegal. And we looked at that, and the city doesn't have power and jurisdiction to make judgments on legality of water flow. That's up to a court or an agency. That's not within the purview of the city. And there was no information submitted into the record that proved that it was illegal. We just have the allegation that it's illegal, and staff didn't feel that that was sufficient. The other thing with regard to 13 was we thought that the objection was misplaced, because all we're really requiring in 13 is routing. We're not requiring detention of off-site water. We're just requiring it to be routed over to Crooks Creek. And we need a plan to show how that's going to happen. And so we think that that's pretty clear. You got to give a plan. We're not violating anybody's rights. We're not requiring anything more than what is the normal rules in Oregon law is that every property owner has the obligation to maintain the natural flow of stormwater. And if this naturally flows across there to Crooks Creek, then we're not imposing anything more on them than the Oregon law imposes in any event. So we didn't change anything on item 13. 14 was not objected to. That's your erosion control condition, which is standard boilerplate language. There was no need to change any of that. We think that passes muster under the Needed Housing Act. 15 is a new one that deals with the floodplain. And it basically what we're requiring is that it be properly analyzed and conditioned according to the rules and regulations in effect by FEMA. Because there is a finger, everybody probably remembers, there's a finger that's got to be mitigated, and that's floodplain, so it has to be done. Condition number 15 is a way for the city to make sure that that all happens, and it happens appropriately and in accordance with the rules of the other governmental agencies. So the staff recommendation is, it's before you, it's item number 1, the motion to approve. And it is a motion to approve with the amended list of conditions that are on page 11 and 12 of the May staff report. And I'd answer any questions you might have with regard to all of that.
What do you think?
I have a question on 7 that we've deleted, the shielding the lighting. I really feel like we need to find a way to word that so that lighting's shielded. This property being in essence 5 feet below existing properties that border it with 2-story houses, there's a good possibility those streetlights are going to be right on the level with bedroom windows. And I really find that offensive. We have to find a way to shield that light.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and
I'm saying work harder, Wally.
well, we spent a lot of time in our staff meetings trying to figure out that one, and we couldn't. We couldn't come up with language that would require a different shield or a different focus or some sort of mechanism that goes with the light.
You can't just say the light has to be below the level of the windows that are on the adjacent property?
When you do that, you're making a value judgment that you don't want to impact the neighbors.
Okay.
And the Needed Housing Act says we can't do that.
Okay.
What does that mean, value judgment? What does that mean?
Well, it's not between A and B.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, A says it's got to be 10 feet. B says it's got to be 15 feet.
Okay.
And then there's another one that says, well, you've got to put it where you want to put it. Not 10 feet or 15 feet, but wherever you want it to be. So the 10-foot is a clear and objective standard. The 20-foot is a clear and objective standard. When you say put it wherever you want it to be, it's not clear and objective. That's a value judgment because you're making up a determination based on whatever personal factors you have, that it might be 7 or 8 or 9. And it's the same thing with the lighting. You know, the code says you have these lights and they illuminate the park. And then when we come in and say, well, we're okay with illuminating the park, but don't illuminate the neighbors, that's a value-laden judgment.
So I don't agree with that, but we have in our code exterior lighting, and it says right here that we cannot glare onto oncoming traffic or onto adjacent residents or residential districts.
And that's superseded by the specialty code, which doesn't have that language.
But they don't, I have the specialty code right here, and they don't go into that I saw.
Exactly.
So that means since they don't go into it, that our code should supersede.
Every place we see that they don't say specifically, we found language that says acceptable to the authority having jurisdiction.
Well,
Is that not us?
yeah, you are, at this point, yeah. And remember that you're getting staff opinions, staff recommendations. You guys are the ultimate decision makers. If you want to put that in there, if you want to change it, you guys have the full and complete authority to make those changes. We're trying to guide you with what we have come up with, trying to put this myriad of law puzzle together in the best way to come up with a defendable decision.
That's just that you've effectively told us what you can defend.
Yeah,
Wally,
basically.
can you explain to them perhaps the Needed Housing Act and how that really supersedes and guides a lot of the decisions, or the criteria that we have here?
It's a difficult law, and the one thing that happens here and in a lot of small cities is that the Needed Housing Act does not apply. You don't ever have to deal with the Needed Housing Act in 99% of what you do. But there is an exception for mobile home parks. And for mobile home parks, the Needed Housing Act does apply to mobile home parks. That's why we're dealing with it here, and you've never dealt with it before, because it's the first time it's ever appeared. And that's why it's so difficult to comprehend, because it trashes your code. You know, what you have determined is the way you want your city to develop. The Needed Housing Act says, we got a balance here. We want affordable housing, we want more housing, we need to make it easier for developers to have housing. Therefore, we're going to take away from small cities and mobile home parks the ability to put conditions on that will make it impossible to build or so expensive to build that they won't get built. That's the policy that they put behind it. And so it supersedes. In the very act, it says, this supersedes your code. And the only loopholes we can find is where it is absolutely silent on an issue. We feel for health, safety, and welfare issues, we can then slip our code in and still apply it when the specialty code is silent. As long as our code is clear and objective and not valueless. Because there are some times when our code would apply, but we still can't apply it.
Okay, can I ask questions that have or haven't been brought up to this point?
Yes, you may.
Okay, as I'm looking at the plans, there's no ADA parking on this site at all. There is no ADA parking on this site at all. The only way my wife can drive over there and visit is to park in the street and drop the ramp into a driveway. She can't park in any of the other spots or the driveways. Is that legal?
ADA parking spaces often aren't shown at the development phase, at the entitlement phase, which is where we all deal with permits here.
Okay.
That's often something that has to be complied with at the building permit phase. So oftentimes if you see a shopping center come in and it's showing a parking lot, they might not show the handicap spaces at this level because they're not sure where they're going to go. Well, that's something that's normally enforced with the building
This is showing 2 spaces in a
code.
pretty limited area.
I'm sorry?
This is showing 4 spaces, 2 in each of a very limited area, but, okay.
They're now going to have on-street parking. So there's a lot more additional parking than just the two.
Okay. Okay.
So we're going to have parking on one side only.
That's what staff is proposing at this point.
Okay, so what's going to keep people from parking on the other side? Are we posting the roads to say parking on one side only?
I don't believe that's written into a condition of approval, but you can certainly add that condition of approval to the project.
I keep hearing that the police can't come on the site, and I have the manufactured dwelling and construction, and under 1010-4B, it says police officials may cite and remove vehicles parked in fire lanes, no parking areas, and in parking spaces reserved for disabled persons. So to me, that says they can come on site and cite, but the only way we could make any teeth with that is if it's posted, right?
Yeah, we can certainly add a condition of approval requiring posting of
Posting
the no
or
parking areas.
parking on one side only, or I don't know how we should word that.
I believe the applicant's narrative indicated that they were going to be putting signs up for no parking, so it was kind of baked into the narrative there and enforceable for us, but we can certainly add a condition of approval to that as well.
Enforceable, except though, Lynn County, our deputies may not go in and cite people for doing that, because that's not a public street. Yes. And so if we cannot go in and issue a citation,
This says that these are private streets, and they have the right to go on private streets.
they do have the right, but I don't think that they're going to be able to enforce those. I do not believe that they will be.
Why? When it says it right here.
Wally, we had this discussion. What was the answer on that?
Well, the feeling was that the specialty code, it's silent on signage. And we felt that if we were to require signage, it's sort of overkill. I mean, it's not going to be striped. We didn't feel it was necessary, and it most likely would not be considered to be a clear and objective standard, because you don't need them, and we think that you do need them, and so that's where the judgment comes in. The code didn't think they needed them, and we think they do, and so that's the classic kind of thing that the Needed Housing Act says we can't impose our judgment on.
Let me remind you of something. You cannot ask the audience questions, but you can add conditions of approval if you're so inclined. If you strongly feel and can get a consensus on that, you might suggest adding that as a condition.
Okay.
That's the only thing we can do.
Right.
So that was kind of my clarification point for Wally there and for us to ask is, so where it's silent, you guys are advising that we don't add to? Because my understanding of regulations and laws, codes like this, is that you can always add to, you can't take away.
Well, the analysis that we came up with is where the specialty code is silent and where our local code is clear and objective. Then we are allowed to impose our local clear and objective code. But even if the specialty code is silent, if our code doesn't meet that Needed Housing Act standard, then we still can't impose it, even though the specialty code is silent.
Clear and objective. So a perfect example would be, we say, you need to put a tree out there, and we want a tree every 20 feet. And you guys said, no, you want it every 15 feet. That is not clear and objective. Okay? So, right, it needs to be within our code, very clear and objective. Knowing that here's the hurdle, has it met that? It's very simple to know what it is. And those are the restrictions that you folks and we as staff are stuck with as a result of this Needed Housing Act.
Sure. And what we're discussing right now is that, as of right now, it's not enforceable. However, it would probably be a best practice for manufacturing parking, in the future.
But again, we're saying,
Yeah.
saying best practice, well, is that value laden? Is that a determination? I think this is perhaps best practice. That, in my opinion, is that we're asserting our value or our opinion on it, and it's not clear and objective. The difficulty with this is if we install some issues in there which are not clear and objective, and it gets tested, it can have monetary repercussions upon the city.
Okay.
That's what we need, that's what we as staff are trying to insulate against.
Wally, what's a mature tree?
Old.
Okay, it says the local planning department can prohibit the disturbance of certain aspects of the land having redeeming value, such as land with a mature tree. Is a 48-inch oak a mature tree? It sounds to me like it's a really old tree.
Yeah, I would say that's qualified.
And so then I could like to ask that tree be left alone even though it's in the middle of the road.
Well, then you run into another problem, and that problem is that
But
if
this
you...
is straight out of, well, okay, go ahead, I'm
Well,
sorry.
There's two elements to the Needed Housing Act. It has to be clear and objective, but it can't also impose conditions or requirements that make the development of the park either unable to develop or make it cost prohibitive to develop. And there would certainly be an argument that said, okay, you gotta leave that tree, but then you've gotta lose the lot, you've gotta go out and around it with the street, and that adds another X number of dollars, we don't know what that might be. And then the argument would be that by imposing that condition, then you have unreasonably increased the cost of that, and in fact, this is an Affordable Housing Act issue. And so that's where it comes down. If you're adding cost to it, it really causes a problem, because that's at the very heart of the needed housing.
So it's incumbent upon us to make a profit for them.
Well, it's incumbent upon you to follow the law.
Okay.
And if that results because of the policies of the legislature that needed housing is developed and somebody makes money, yeah, I guess it is.
Thank you.
Well, we are bound to make decisions by the information that's provided to us. We have a staff report, and I think for one, we should take their recommendations. The Fair Housing Act dictates some of the things we can and can't do. We have plans for the city we'd like to have, but in some cases, we just can't have those.
So a question about the trash collection plan, is that looking at whether or not we're gonna have trash at each house or a central?
Well, I think Matt can maybe address that, but the idea is that we don't know. And so that condition says, give us a plan
Okay.
and show us how it is, and then Matt will look at it, work with the developer, and they'll come up with an approved trash collection plan. We don't know what that would be yet.
Okay. And then I'm struggling with the Cripps Creek thing, the off-site flows. And I get the fact of what you said, that it's already doing it, and that we can't do more than what's there. But we're going, so how do you do that? I mean, because you're going to change the whole thing with your impervious surface. I mean, and so how do you quantify that? Because the last thing we wanted, Cripps Creek is really important to the city, and we need to not, and it floods, and it silts in, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of that, but it's on someone else's land.
There's two elements to that. The first one is on-site, dealing with the impervious surfaces and all of that.
Yeah.
And that is provided for in one of the conditions with the detention basin and the metered flows and the mitigation of that finger of wetland. That's one, that's the on-site. Then the second issue is the off-site, when water comes from off-site and flows across this property to get to Crooks Creek. We don't know if that happens, we don't know in what volume, we don't actually know where it goes, whether it's directed or sheet flow. We don't have any of that information. So what the condition is saying is give us a plan that tells us how you're going to take that water that's coming onto your property and get it over to Crooks Creek where it naturally would flow.
Okay.
And that might very well be use of their existing detention plan. So it might very well be channeled down where that wetlands is going to be mitigated into the detention and then metered out with the on-site into Crooks Creek. We just don't know. But the off-site and the on-site are two different issues with regarding, there's two different conditions that deal with those. But the idea is the first condition deals with all the on-site.
Right.
And so that's why we have the detention basin. The other one is just a routing condition. Just tell us how you're going to get the water from there to here.
So have they taken the treatment basin off of the plan? I never got an answer on what that was and what it did.
I don't think I know the answer to that. Maybe Matt does?
They showed two different basins in the plan. One of them was one that we understood would be needed. The second one, even our engineer wasn't clear on exactly what that one was for, but we were waiting for the hydrology analysis to come in to explain to us what that basin was going to be doing. Did I get that right, Janelle?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So we don't know yet, but with the condition will give us the plan that should fill in those blanks.
Okay. All right.
Any more questions?
Oh, noise. So, the people that live next door, and I get the fact that.
Can you folks hear her? Can you hear her?
Connie, maybe pull that,
Lean
can you pull
your-
the mic up?
Bring your mic a little closer.
I pushed it away.
People
And
want
I
to
couldn't
hear
figure
you.
out why you put it right by me. So noise, we had this a couple months ago. I guess my concern is that there could be noise from this, and there will be, because there's going to be a lot of people there. Is there a way that we can put a condition that says if there's, I don't know how you word it, but if there's complaints, that we do a noise study and do a mitigation for that? Is there a way to do that?
You should address it, because I'm not sure what the code says.
Well, in this case, the Needed Housing Act, I don't think would allow us to do that because we don't have clear and objective standards in our code that say what noise levels have to be mitigated to. So if we say you have to give us a noise study to minimize the impacts on the neighbors, in this case, we couldn't ask for that because would have to apply discretion and subjectivity to determine how much is enough. In previous projects we talked about, it's absolutely okay because the Needed Housing Act doesn't apply to that. So we don't have to worry about being handcuffed by these clear and objective standards for commercial developments. But this case is different. And we do have those handcuffs on where everything has to be clear and objective. And so even if we came up with conditions of approval that laid something out that was clear and objective, if we were doing that to try and implement a criteria that was not clear and objective from the beginning, it's still moot. We can't implement any of our criteria or our standards that aren't clear and objective from the start. And I think the best example of that is our screening one. We do have a requirement in our code that says it has to be screened from the neighbors, but it doesn't say from what point. It doesn't say how tall the trees need to be. It says 80%, but how many viewers and standing where? And if you have to ask any of those questions, we've lost the battle already.
Right.
And so hopefully in the new code, we're going to, put in far more clear and objective standards that we can use much more thoroughly. But as we sit today, we don't have the luxury of using those.
We don't have it in code, but we have an ordinance for noise.
Oh, yes. you do.
Oh, that's different.
That's
Yeah.
different,
Okay,
yes.
so what I want to know is there a way that we can put it in, because we have the ordinance, that says if we get so many complaints within a certain period of time, that we do a noise study and have some mitigation for that?
Complaints for talking too loud or?
Wally-
I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to talk, I'm just trying to get a conversation going.
I think what we have to do is distinguish between the noise ordinance and the land use process. And I think what you're talking about is you could go into the noise ordinance, do whatever amendments you would have to the noise ordinance, and it would apply throughout the city to everybody, including the park. But you can't do it in this process. You
So
have
it
to.
already does, is what you're saying, so. then
Well,
we're
it may
already
not do
covered.
it to the detail that you're looking for. So I would suggest taking a look at the noise ordinance and marking it up and, proposing amendments so that the noise ordinance says what you want it to say.
It may already, right, Forrest?
It does not say that if 5 complaints are made, a noise study needs to be done. It doesn't say that.
I'm sure it doesn't, but it does have something that you can call the sheriff.
Well, yes, you can call a sheriff, and again, though, it's very subjective. It says unreasonable noise. So those in the past have been very difficult to prosecute because it's vague. What's unreasonable noise? Now, if we were to say unreasonable noise is 65 decibels, at least for a 5-minute period every hour for a 6-hour period, that's very clear and objective.
All right.
So we can always, though, revisit that, but just know whatever ordinance that we prepare is going to be applicable citywide.
Right. Okay.
That could very much close down our fall event that Millersburg had just started in the park. If we wanted to get that,
There you go.
we can't aim it
More
at one
celebration.
particular.
But the
person.
police are already there.
The police might live in the park too.
Oh, I know. I'm teasing.
Well, you can do that, but just understand that noise ordinances throughout the state, those types of statutes are just very unclear, well, very difficult to uphold, and they have been found at times to be unconstitutional unless it is very clear. Because if I were to go out and say, I don't know, for example, I don't know what I could do in a situation that I'm violating the law. But if I know that if I play music at 65 decibels for a 5-minute period, that would uphold constitutional
Right.
question.
We don't have that.
We do not have that. We can always implement that, but then there's the issue of enforcing it. Well, not enforcing it, but being able to prove that. And again, I want to emphasize this needed housing. I think Matt's use of handcuffing is the exact appropriate wording. The Needed Housing Act is applicable to parks in this situation. And it really says that the legislature has just basically said, we are short on housing. This criteria, this Needed Housing Act, is going to trump basically everything that is within city code. And so we need to make sure we comply with that. And I think, again, Wally said it correctly, we've never had an issue like that where the Needed Housing Act has applied in this city, at least in the 25 years I've been here doing this.
So I just asked some clarifying questions to make sure that I got an understanding before, we cast a vote on it. So number 6 and number 5 and 6 were relating to the sidewalks and the width of the road. My question kind of was, are they still going to have sidewalks on one side, at least in their plan? There was sidewalks there on the one side, correct? That's a requirement, okay?
Yeah, and they would be pavement adjacent without a green space, and that's how it is drawn in the plan right now.
Okay, so that was one. And then obviously we got rid of the 80% screening requirement in 10 and 11.
Yes.
Okay? So anything, the canopy trees are sufficient.
Yeah, and there are trees, and there are notations on the plan that some trees are being kept and some aren't. And so that requirement has been converted to give us more detail on what you have said on that page of the plan.
And then the staff in condition number 15, do they feel like the requirements there for condition of approval number 15, does that address the flood hazard concerns and in terms of manufacturing home park specialty code that are listed in there, that you can't build in swampy terrains? And do we?
Yeah, we believe that that condition will pass muster under the Needed Housing Act.
Okay. Those are my major questions on the issue.
Can I make one more comment?
Sure, go ahead.
I'm struggling, and I'm going to tell you why. It's because, you have a garbage plan, you have irrigation plan, you've got stormwater plan, you've got all of this stuff that we're supposed to vote that this is a good thing, and I don't even know what they are.
It's the same thing when we approve a subdivision. They don't have all those plans when we approve those.
It's a tentative.
But we have code.
Huh?
We have code. that applies to most of it.
Well-
So we kind of know what we're getting. But in this
Yes,
case, I really
it'll
don't
come,
know.
it'll come into design, I believe, yes.
Well, Connie, what we're voting on tonight is to prove the concept. The individual thing, the individual items, they will have to bring back to staff to get approval on.
I
And if
understand.
they don't get approval, then the project doesn't go forward. So there has to be a compromise to work out with the city on all these different items.
At this point, it hasn't even been engineered, I'm sure. They won't spend the time to engineer it if they can't get it approved. When they engineer it, it's when they're going to bring the final to you, so where you can ask those questions at that point.
But we won't see it.
Well, in most cases, we're not trained to see it.
No, I understand. But I'm just saying, it won't come to us.
Well, that's not within our scope to
That's right.
decide.
That's my point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't really have to.
No,
That's what we have staff
I
for.
understand that, but I'm sitting here going, I'm voting on something that I don't even know what I'm voting
Well,
on.
that's why we have 4 professionals sitting here that know more than we do. We are just a council, a group, citizens, to okay something that we've been directed by the people we pay, and try not to make a prejudge if you don't like the system. In this case, if we all voted no, first thing to do is take it to the state. LUBA can turn around and tell us what we have to do, and basically they've told us what to do with the Affordable Housing Act. No matter what you think about the plan, we should follow the lead of the individuals that we pay the money for to make the system work.
I understand, but I don't like it.
Well, then you need,
I understand, but I don't like it.
Yeah, and I think, I think from the letters of submission and everything, I think it's been raised to the planning commission and to the council that there are plenty of concerned citizens out there in terms, that's why I brought up, conditional approval number 15, which is the flooding, because there are plenty of pictures in every email that we've received over the last, 30 days pretty much, that highlight that it's a very swampy area, it's very wet, and over 150 people from the community signed a petition claiming that. And as long as everyone's concerns, and yes, there are some unknowns going into this that the staff is going to have to vet and continue to reinforce the standards. I think we've done our part.
Anybody else? Comments? Okay. I think it's time to call for a motion now.
I'd like to make a motion
You've got the copy?
right here.
Okay.
And my glasses on. And again, I'm making a motion based on the people that we pay to oversee the city of Millersburg, so we don't get our tails in the ring here. Well, I'm trying to make you happy. I'd like to make a motion to approve, based upon the findings of fact, any testimony, the conditions of approval and staff recommendations listed in the staff report, and because of the proposed project satisfies the applicant criteria. I motion for the adoption of the findings from the staff report dated April 15th of 2019 and May 15th of 2019. And further motion that the Planning Commission approve conditional use permit 19-01 and site plan 19-01, Evening Star Manufactured Home Park, pursuant to the amended conditions of approval listed in the staff report dated May 15th of 2019.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there any questions? You want to question the motion, or?
We need a second, don't we?
I'm going to ask for a second. Okay. If not, then I'll ask for a second.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion and a second. We're going to call for a vote. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? We have one. Please note that. The motion carries. Pardon?
In the specialty code, there's a provision for 4-foot sidewalk. Thank you. But only on one side. That's fine, that's fine. I just didn't know what the street.
Okay. In conclusion, we would like to thank all of those who have come into testimony, and your comments are very helpful. Thank you. If you would like to appeal the decision to the city council, you must appeal within staff within 15 days. Thank you so much for coming.
One small correction on that, it's within 15 days of the time the notice of decision is sent out, not 15 days of today.
Okay.
Now, we're going to try and get the notice of decision out tomorrow, but I can't guarantee that'll happen. We legally have 5 days to do it, but
Okay,
it'll be 15 days from that point.
15 days from the
The time we mail out the notice of decision.
time to mail out. Okay.
And that day, if people are concerned about that date, they may contact the city hall, and we can let you know exactly when that date is.
Absolutely.
Okay, meeting's adjourned.
We had a city planner update as well.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. We're back in session.
Okay.
Okay, back in session. Back in session.
Thank you.
I didn't have much of an update for you.
Wait, sit down, please.
Reconvene.
This won't take long. My fault, I'm sorry.
But the extent of my update is very simple, just that that pencil sketch we saw the other day of staff's suggested zoning changes to the map, we went ahead and digitized that for you so you can see it on a smaller scale and be able to look over this. And so we have another workshop coming up here shortly. So take this home, mark it up, go crazy, tell us where you think good ideas are and bad ideas are, and we'll talk about it all when we get back together next time. And if you want a digital copy of this, Jake can email it out to you as well. That's all.
I have a question.
Sure.
The residential medium, I thought we were making that urban transition. No, I'm sorry, not urban transition. No, I guess you're right, that was what we were doing, mixed use, I'm sorry. I thought we were making it mixed use.
Well, we have a mixed-use section up in the corner of the city, up here, up by Love's, if that's what you mean.
No,
That's the only place we really talked, about mixed use being applied.
So-
We talked about some higher densities here in the middle where the yellow is,
okay,
but that's residential medium based on John's code.
Yeah, those are all the duplexes.
right. Okay,
Take it home, mark it up, we'll talk about it.
no, I was just trying to remember back to our conversation.
Since those are duplexes there in residential medium, and at what point would it make it residential high?
We don't have one.
We don't have residential high.
Duplexes or something like that, or?
Well, there's a certain density that's allowed in the residential medium, and I don't remember off the top of my head what that went up to, but it would certainly allow more density. We didn't make this yellow because there's existing duplexes there. We made that yellow there to afford the ability for them to convert to something even more dense than what's there today. That's the idea.
Condominiums and apartments in that area.
Could. Multifamily would be permitted.
Me again, see what happens.
Turn all the duplexes down,
Anything further?
That's the extent of my comments.
Is that it? Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you